Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 17 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we examine December 1967. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. As the second UK tour, the package tour which the Jimi Hendrix Experienced headlined, drew to an end in Glasgow early on in the month. Jimi, Noel and Mitch spent the remainder of the year variously recording for what would form their third LP, attending interviews and photoshoots, going to gigs, jamming and performing. This culminated in the group's final performance for 1967 at the Christmas on Earth Continued concert, December 22nd, while Jimi ended the year at a New Year's Eve party held at the Speakeasy, performing a 30-minute version of Auld Lang Syne. And so we begin with December 1st, which sees the group performing at Central Hall, Chatham, Kent, for 2 shows. The first show of the evening, scheduled for 6:15 p.m., started late. While some of the groups were at the Town Hall, since that was the venue listed in the tour itinerary by the PR company, looking for the audience, a few hundred yards away, the audience at the capacity-packed Central Hall wondered where the groups were. After a few changes in the program order, the Nice kicked off the evening, playing just 2 songs. Next on stage, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Songs played during one of the 2 shows: Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Hey Joe, Purple Haze, and Wild Thing, in a piece that appeared in the Chatham Standard on the 5th of December. We had to wait for Hendrix himself for another performance as exciting as this one. He opened his act with the Beatles' number Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the 3-piece group made as much of an impression as a studio full of musicians. Once upon a time, this sort of noise could not be reproduced outside a studio. He did several of his own numbers, including unfaultable versions of Hey Joe and Purple Haze and the Trog's Wild Thing. The Pink Floyd was, for me, the biggest disappointment. December 1st is also the UK release date for the group's second album, Axis Bold as Love. Unlike the previous album, the covers of both the UK and American versions were the same, except that the latter had the lyrics printed inside. The album cover depicts Hendrix and the Experience as various forms of Vishnu, incorporating a painting of the musicians by Roger Law from a photo portrait by Carl Ferris. The Axis LP was released to uniformly ecstatic reviews as follows: Disc and Music Echo, the 16th of December 1967. In a piece titled Hendrix, Fantastic Second Album. One of the most incredible things about Jimi is that something as deeply personal as his music should appeal to so many people. Honesty must be the answer, and it's nice to see it on the winning side. Melody Maker, the 9th of December 1967. With Jimi, the music is 3D. It's too much. Amaze your ears, boggle your mind, flip your lid, do what you want. But please get into Hendrix like you never have before. It's just too much. And Record Mirror, the 2nd of December 1967. A vivid listening experience. Jimi and the Mitchell-Redding duo have produced something very special, a hit LP with no doubts. Interestingly, the album was not released in the US until January 1968, and it took until April for a qualified review from Rolling Stone to appear, by which time the band were well into their first US tour. In an interview given not long after the release of the Axis, Jimi Hendrix had this to say about the LP. The album was made over the period of 16 days, which I'm very sad about. But we had to get it out to put in all the kiddies' stockings for Christmas. We were really deep into it, and all the songs on it are exactly the way we felt right then, so it is really us. We all helped in producing it with Chaz Chandler, and I mixed it with him as well. It was mixed beautifully. But then we lost the original, so we had to remix it the next morning within 11 hours, and it's very hard to do that. It could have been so much better. The songs could have been better too. As soon as you finish, you have 100 completely new ideas. The only people that's on it is us 3, except on one song. You Got Me Floating, one of the Move, sang the background with Noel and Mitch, and that's our manager's big feat on the fade out of If 6 Was 9. That was a complete jam session, and then we put the words on afterwards. Gary Leeds and Graham Nash did some foot stomping, and that's me on the flute. That's what you call a great feeling of the blues, how you feel at a particular time. I adore If 6 Was 9. It means that it really doesn't matter if everything is upside down as long as it doesn't bother you, and you can cope with it. It doesn't say nothing bad about nobody. It just says let them go on and screw up theirs, just as long as they don't mess with me. On Spanish Castle Magic, Noel uses an 8-string bass. I was playing the same thing on guitar in unison with the bass. It didn't come out as clear as we wanted it to, but it was a hint of what we were trying to do. It's a place you wouldn't put your grandmother, and it's dedicated to the plainclothes police and other goofballs. On Up From the Skies, it's thanks to Mitch for the jazz. It's the story of a guy who's been on Earth before, but on a different turning of the axis. Now he's come back to find this scene happening, like people laying up in grey buildings and so forth, dusting away, and people run around shouting, "Oh, love the world," eating rodent seeds and so forth. People must respect other people's ideas, as long as they're not hurting anybody. They must respect the time sequence. Why keep living in the past? Personally, I like to write songs like Castles Made of Sand. A lot of times you might get an idea from something you have seen, and then you write it down, the way you might have wanted it to happen, or the way it could have happened. It's like these buildings ain't going to be here for all that long. When it's time for a change, by all means put that thing into operation. I dig writing slow songs because I find it easier to get more blues and feelings into them. Little Wing is based on a very, very simple American Indian style. I got the idea when I was in Monterey, and I just happened to be looking at everything around. So I'd figured that I'd take everything I'd seen and put it, maybe, in the form of a girl and call it Little Wing. It'll just fly away. Everybody was flying and in a nice mood, like the police and everybody were really groovy out there. So I just took all these things and just put them in one very, very small little matchbox. Keep it just like that. It's very simple. I like it though. It's one of the very few I like. In Little Wing, we put the guitar through the Leslie speaker of an organ, and it sounded like jelly bread. And we've got a gadget called the Octavia that we use on a song called One Rainy Wish. It comes through a whole octave higher, so that when playing high notes, it sometimes sounds like a whistle or a flute. We've tried to get the freaky tracks right into another dimension, so you get the sky effect like you're coming down from the heavens. Like on Bold as Love, we do something called phasing. It makes it sound like planes going through your membranes and chromosomes. A cat got that together accidentally and he turned us onto it. It was a special sound and we didn't want to use tapes of airplanes. We wanted to have music itself warped, but the secret of my sound is largely the electronic genius of our tame boffin, who is known to us as Roger the Valve. He is an electronics man working in a government department, and he would probably lose his job if it was known he was working with a pop group. Whatever incredible sounds we think up, he manages to create them. He has rewired my guitars in a special way to produce an individual sound, and he has made me a fantastic fuzz tone. I love different sounds, as long as they are related to what we are trying to say or if they touch me in a way. I don't like to be gimmicky or different just for the sake of being different. Don't forget about the music. We don't. Some people say that the first album sounded the same all the way through, but there wasn't time. It was a first one, a quick one, you understand, for a new group. In Axis, there are more gentle things, more things for people to think about if they want to. It's quieter as far as guitar is concerned, but then we're emphasizing the words. I think we're getting less rebellious, if you know what I mean. To people who are not listening very much, Axis will put them to sleep right away. I just thought about the title. There might be a meaning behind the whole thing. The axis of the earth turns around and changes the face of the world, and completely different civilizations come about, or another age comes about. In other words, it changes the face of the earth, and it only takes about a quarter of a day. Well, it's the same with love. It can turn your whole world upside down, like the axis of the earth. It's that powerful, that bold. People kill themselves for love. But when you have it for somebody or something, an idea maybe, it can beat anger and time and move the seas and the mountains. That's the way it feels. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. On the 2nd of December, The Experience played 2 shows at the Dome in Brighton, Sussex. Rory Campbell, who was just 16 years old and attending his very first pop concert, saw the first show of the evening. The package show at the Dome was very good. Eamon Corner, who in their moments performed a sort of Irish show band or black soul show, synchronized routine. Ulster's heir apparent with Henry McCulloch, announced as Ireland's most popular act, though completely unknown in Ireland at that time, and Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett on the verge of insanity, but the band holding together excitingly and topping the bill, the Hendrix Experience. Jimi emerged onto the stage from the darkness of the circular hall, wearing glimmering pale blue crushed velvet flared trousers, and his performance that evening completely surpassed the other acts, both in impact and musically. I quote from a letter I wrote the next day. Lastly was Jimi Hendrix. It was by far the best and most exciting act that night. He played really well, forcing the most extraordinary sounds from his guitar. Throughout the program he sweated profusely, scratched his head, and muttered things to the audience, completely cool and unconcerned at their reaction. While tuning, someone yelled something unintelligible but racist sounding at him, and he replied, "I didn't catch what you said, mister, but I sure wish the same to you." Cheers and applause. During his numbers he hopped up and down and his tongue flickered in and out. Among the songs were Foxy Lady, Purple Haze, Hey Joe and Wild Thing. The drummer, Mitch Mitchell, did a very good solo. Bass guitarist Noel Redding wore a top hat. While Mick Coyne recalls meeting Hendrix at the Brighton Dome. There was a limited amount of local publicity before the shows, in the Brighton Evening Argus, and even less about the show after. I had learned about the tour through the Jimi Hendrix Experienced fan club, so I had purchased an advance ticket for 62 pence. I arrived at the Dome stage door about 4:45 in the evening. It was turning dark, and at just after 5 o'clock a car drew up, facing me, across the pavement from the stage door. The car was a Ford Zodiac Mark IV, metallic silver and an E registration. The passenger door was opposite the stage door, and as it opened, just one person got out of the car, and I could see it was Jimi Hendrix. As he shut the car door and walked around the front of the car towards the stage door, I walked towards him and called, "Jim." I don't know why. Perhaps because of the excitement of the situation, but I didn't say Jimmy. Jimmy stopped as he got on the pavement and the car pulled away. As I walked towards him, he looked stunning, and immediately he reminded me of all the old Red Indian photos I'd seen. Jimmy was wearing a headband with lots of beads and necklaces round his neck. He wore a brown fringed jacket. The boots Jimmy had on were also fringed. Lastly, I seem to remember green trousers. I asked Jimmy for his autograph and handed him my open Jimi Hendrix Experienced fan club membership card and fan club red platinum pen. We were all alone, and it was magical, although little was said. As Jimmy went to sign, he looked at the card a little oddly but signed it. He then passed the card and pen back, but as he did, the pen fell to the ground. "Sorry, man," he said. I couldn't believe how polite he was as we both went to pick up the pen. Jimmy reached it first and apologized again as he handed it back with those oh-so-long-fingered hands. Jimmy then went in through the stage door, and I just stood there for a few moments stunned, still with no one else around. Eventually, when I did come back to earth, I cursed to myself several times and still do today. Why didn't I say more? Why didn't I ask to go in with Jimmy for a while? Why didn't I have a camera? Mick goes on to describe the second show. I believe the show kicked off around 8:40 p.m, and I would guess the Jimi Hendrix Experience took the stage about 10 or 10:15. By the time Jimmy took the stage, he looked completely different to when I saw him earlier. Jimmy was wearing a black jacket, dark trousers and the hat. I cannot remember the shirt or what Mitch and Noel were wearing, although I think Noel was wearing a hat as well. Jimmy played a white right-handed Stratocaster with a rosewood fretboard, and I don't remember him changing guitars during the set. The songs were about the same at both shows. I remember Jimmy took off his hat at one point for a very short time and hung it on the microphone stand, possibly to play the guitar behind his head. But the theatrics were not as physical as when I saw him at Worthing 10 months earlier, and the music was just louder. The show finished about 11 o'clock, and as we left the Dome, I reflected on the meeting with Jimmy and the chances I had missed. But I will never forget that meeting, the spectacular vision, the feeling I experienced, the quietness and shyness of Jimmy. I never saw Jimmy in concert again, but his music still carried on moving me, perhaps even more now than it did then. On December 3rd, the group plays 2 shows at the Theatre Royal in Nottingham. The following piece by Richard Williams appeared in the Nottingham Evening News and Post the next day. The audience, older than most, gave a reception which was scarcely more than polite to most of the groups, and it was not until the arrival of Hendrix that they really went wild. Starting off with a deafening Sgt. Pepper, he built a climax right through his act until, in his hit song Purple Haze, the The theatre's sedate foundations threatened to crumble under the weight of his assault. Although he was not quite at the top of his game, an out-of-form Hendrix can still carve any other blues group into ribbons. Another Nottingham audience member, Phil J. Ellis, recalled, "I'd been a Jimi Hendrix fan right back to when I saw him for the first time on TV, performing Hey Joe, but didn't start going to gigs until later in 1967. When the amazing lineup for the winter package tour headlined by Jimi was announced, I quickly snapped up a ticket for the early show. Couldn't do the late show as the last bus home left at 9 p.m, and having only recently left school, I was a few years off owning a car. I have a number of very strong memories from the night. Keith Emerson of the Nice throwing his old Hammond around, the Moves' Trev Burton walking out and kicking over an amp, Syd Barrett failing to show and the Nice's Davey-O List standing in for him with Pink Floyd, Andy Fairweather-Low in white suit going down on his knees to sing Gin House with the totally out-of-place teeny bop band Amen Corner. But it was the Jimi Hendrix Experience I was there to see. As I faced the stage, Jimi stood to the left, Noel to the right with Mitch in the middle. Jimi was wearing a wonderful jacket with horizontal waves of orange, beige and black, which I have never seen in a photo. I think he was also wearing a white ruffled shirt and orange trousers, but it's the jacket that sticks in the mind. Being an early show, Jimi didn't really pull out the stops. I recall an entertaining but workmanlike trot through the hits and a couple of album tracks including some trademark Playing with Teeth and Behind the Head. Again, I can't be 100% sure, but I'd say the set list included Hey Joe, Purple Haze, Wind Cries, Mary, Burning of the Midnight Lamp, Foxy Lady and Spanish Castle Magic. There was certainly no Killing Floor, like a Rolling Stone or Wild Thing, which at that time I had read about but never heard. So that was the first time I saw Jimi in concert. I spent the next couple of years waiting in vain for the next UK tour. Sadly, it was never to be. After the shows, the bands drove approximately 200 miles by coach to their accommodation at the Royal Station Hotel, Neville Street, Newcastle upon Tyne. On 4th of December, the Jimi Hendrix Experience plays 2 shows at the City Hall in Newcastle. Chaz Chandler later told this story of Jimi and the show. Jimi had this guitar shaped like an arrow, known as a flying V. It was one of those nights when everything was going wrong. No matter what happened, an amp was breaking down, there was crackling coming over, and at one point, halfway through the act, he was getting so uptight because the world was falling down around him out on stage. He took his guitar and threw it at the amp, and this is where the good luck comes into it. The guitar went into the amp and stuck. It was just like an enormous arrow sticking out of this amplifier. The audience thought it was part of the act. The amp just went and from that minute, nothing else went wrong. It was just one of those little magic seconds. It just altered the balance of the act and he went on to just tear the place apart. While Noel Redding recorded this memory of the night in his diary. In Newcastle, we met pleasantly intelligent but coldly determined people like Bouncer Dave, who beat up 8 guys after they had axed his head in and before he walked to hospital. During the show, one guy jumped 20 feet from the balcony to the stage, only to be lobbed off by a roadie wielding a mic stand. On the 5th of December 1967, the Hendrix Package Tour ends at Green's Playhouse in Glasgow, Scotland. The set list: Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Hey Joe, Burning of the Midnight Lamp, Foxy Lady, Purple Haze and Wild Thing. According to Noel Redding, Glasgow was a shithouse. The audience in Glasgow was wonderful, but the vibes were heavy. This huge bouncer was staggering about nearly legless, shouting for the band's autographs. Where are you? We hid. Afterwards, while trying to get the crowds out, he got his finger cut off in the door. He never missed it. Only wouldn't you know it was one of the musicians who eventually said, "What's this? Ah!" While Gary Brooker remembered, the gig was an absolute shambles, with Jimi having the curtains closed on him halfway through his set, because he was supposedly doing rude things with his guitar. Then green-clothed, short haircut, cap and gloved staff tried to pull him off the stage. Another recollection from Glasgow. For a few minutes, the roars of 3,500 fans welcomed the Jimi Hendrix Experience to the city. But on stage, Jimi takes his time tuning his guitar. Gradually, the crowd calmed down and an air of anticipation filled the room. Eddie Tobin, the former manager of the sensational Alex Harvey Band, still remembers clearly what happened next. Hendrix actually opened the set with comments. There was a young girl from Glasgow in the crowd shouting, "Jimi! Jimi! Jimi!" over and over again as this continued. Hendrix faced his Marshall amp. he walked backwards to his microphone and spoke crookedly. He said, "I hear you, baby," and launched into Purple Haze. The crowd went crazy. The way he said it took my breath away. I was like, this guy's the king of the castle. The British tour proved to be Jimmy's last. After the release of Axis Boulder's Love, the Experience were now too big for provincial theatres. The group had maximised their earning potential in Britain, and the US was far too lucrative to ignore. So on that basis, Mike Jeffrey decides that America, and specifically New York, would become the group's new base. December 6th saw Jimmy go to a party for the Foundations. Noel noted in his diary, "Saw a run of the BBC Two film Colour Me Pop, which featured The Experience. The first colour test recording never aired." December 7th saw photo sessions at Mike Jeffrey's office by Chris Walter and Ivan Keeman, which also includes pictures of Eric Burdon and Jimmy dressed as Santa. Later that day, The Experience then goes to Old Compton Street to the premises of Track Records, where the group attends the screening of a film taken from the Blackpool concert filmed back on November 25th. That evening, at the Speakeasy Club London, Jimmy takes part in a jam session with Ainsley Dunbar, Noel Redding and Alan Price. December 6th saw Jimmy go to a party for the Foundations. Noel noted in his diary, "Saw a run of the BBC Two film Colour Me Pop, which featured The Experience. The first colour test recording never aired." December 7th saw photo sessions at Mike Jeffrey's office by Chris Walter and Ivan Keeman, which also includes pictures of Eric Burdon and Jimmy dressed as Santa. Later that day, The Experience then goes to Old Compton Street to the premises of Track Records, where the group attends the screening of a film taken from the Blackpool concert filmed back on November 25th. That evening, at the Speakeasy Club London, Jimmy takes part in a jam session with Ainsley Dunbar, Noel Redding and Alan Price. December 8th, Boreham Wood, Hertfordshire. Recordings for the ATV Good Evening television show with Jonathan King, broadcast the 10th of December 1967. The Experience begins the show with a track taken from the new album Spanish Castle Magic, main take with live vocals. December 9th, and Jimmy does a recorded interview at 43 Upper Berkeley Street in London with Meatball Fulton, aka Thomas Lopez. See the links to listen in full. December 10th, Speakeasy Club London. Jimmy attends the concert of the group The Moody Blues. December 11th, interview with Disc and Music Echo. December 12th, Jimmy jams with Fairport Convention at the Speakeasy. December 13th, Olympic Studios London, studio recordings. December 14th, photo session with photographer DEZO HOFFMAN at Mike Jeffrey's office. One of the photos will be used for the cover of the Smash Hits compilation. Also on that day, Mike Jeffrey files suit against Decca Records for the release of the Curtis Knight single Hush Now. Jimmy clarified this during an interview with Peter Oakes for the newspaper The People, later published December 17th, 1967. December 15th, London, Playhouse BBC Theatre, radio recordings for Top Gear, BBC Radio 1, performing Wait Until Tomorrow, Day Tripper, Radio 1 jingle, Hear My Train A-Comin', and Spanish Castle Magic. December 16th, London, television recordings for the BBC TV Top of the Pop Survey, 1967, which was later broadcast December 25th. The group is introduced by Alan Freeman and they perform Purple Haze, studio take with live vocals. December 19th, photo shoot at Bruce Fleming's studio, London. Note this is when the acoustic Hear My Train A-Comin' is shot, see links to view. December 20th, Olympic Sound Studios, London recordings of Dream, Dance, Crosstown Traffic, Spanish Castle Magic, Touch You and Cat Talking to You. Also on that day, Noel recorded in his diary, interviews for American Magazine. December 21st, Olympic Sound Studios, London, studio recordings, Dance, Have You Ever Been, Crosstown Traffic and The Gods Made Love. Later at Mike Jeffrey's office, 39 Gerrard Street, London interview and photo session conducted by Linda Eastman, the future Mrs. McCartney. Linda recalled, "The only place it was possible to take a photo was above the table. That's where there was the most light. The group agreed to come to the table. After spending a tiring day of studio work, Jimmy is photographed yawning with fatigue." December 22nd, Christmas on Earth continued at the National Hall, Olympia Theatre, London. audio soundboard recording made as well as the concert being filmed, for which the band was paid £1,000. The last big event of 1967, The Christmas on Earth Continued, was billed as an all-night Christmas dream party at London's Olympia Exhibition Hall. A huge event with a fairground and film shows, the idea was to create a multimedia happening. Many regarded it as the last of the great British underground events, while others saw it as a purely commercial cash-in. The Jimi Hendrix Experience headlined with support acts including Eric Burdon and the Animals, Pink Floyd, The Move, Soft Machine, Keith West and Tomorrow, Graham Bond Organisation, Sam Gopal Dream, Paper Blitz Fabric. The Who were announced but later cancelled their participation, and the Unbilled Traffic performed. The set list for that evening: Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Foxy Lady and Red House. After the show, everyone meets at the Speakeasy Club. Noel Redding noted, "I encountered strobe lights for the first time. I got lost in them, feeling far too detached, but I knew I had to play. I was caught in a slow-motion black and white time warp. All I could see were old-time movie flickers of Jimmy laughing at me as I tried to keep in touch with the tempo." While Mitch Mitchell had the following memory of the event. "I remember the Olympia event really well. In the afternoon they had this huge inflatable cushion which they intended to use as a prop, and while they were blowing it up, a few of us decided to sit on it. It was the size of a mini swimming pool, and the top was about 8 feet off the ground when it was fully inflated. Somehow, I managed to lose my grip and slipped off, hitting my head really hard on the concrete floor. Looking back, I should have gone and had it checked out, because I was definitely concussed. I didn't mention it to anybody and played the gig, but it was one of the few times I really felt uncomfortable playing." One reviewer described the event as follows: "A truly spectacular event. 1967's Christmas on Earth Continued gets sadly remembered as the last major show Syd Barrett played with Pink Floyd, ending the set dazed and motionless on stage, his arms hanging limp at his sides. Barrett's breakdown wasn't the only thing that kept this massive happening, the last gasp of the British underground scene, from taking off as it should have. Some researchers have claimed that the concert held in the vast London Olympia suffered from hopelessly inadequate publicity. This and a particularly severe winter freeze meant sparse attendance and financial disaster for the organisers. Despite all this, the lineup alone would make lovers of 60s psych rock salivate." December 23rd. Jimi Hendrix attended an event for underprivileged children, held at the Roundhouse, London, where, dressed as Santa Claus, he handed out presents. December 24th. Dave Mason and Jimmy meet at Dave's apartment, possibly rehearsing All Along the Watchtower, which they recorded together on January 21st, 1968. Later that evening, Jimmy participates in a recorded jam session with the group Sam Gopal Dream at the Speakeasy Club, London. December 25th. According to some accounts, Jimmy spends the day at his apartment with Kathy Etchingham, where he is treated to a Christmas dinner of eggs and chips, then spends the evening at Noel Redding's Folkestone residence to celebrate Noel's 22nd birthday, staying until the early hours of the morning. December 26th. Jimmy spends Christmas with Bruce Fleming and his family, according to Hendrix biographers Harry Shapiro and Caesar Glebeek. Christmas Day 1967 was Noel's birthday, so Jimmy spent the day at Noel's family house in Folkestone, but the rest of Christmas with photographer Bruce Fleming, his wife and some friends. Bruce invited Jimmy when he realized that for all the number of people that would hang around Jimmy's neck, dragging him to this party and that reception during the year, nobody had actually invited him anywhere for Christmas. Bruce recalls a fun few days. "We got to talk a lot. Architecture, painting, all sorts. He was into everything. We just had a brilliant time and a lot of laughs. Americans like Christmas and we had turkey, the whole thing. He was very radical in his opinions and in his ideas. A very original thinker, very laid back, very quiet, very funny, and he had a beautiful sense of humor." See the link to the interview with Bruce Fleming. December 27th. At the Speakeasy Club, London, Jimmy participates in a jam session with Dave Mason, Eric Burdon and Harry Hughes of The Clouds. The 28th to 30th of December are believed to have been spent recording at Olympic Sound Studios, London. Finally, December 31st. Jimmy attends a New Year's Eve party at the Speakeasy, London, where he plays a 30-minute version of Auld Lang Syne, with other musicians, including Eric Burdon and Ginger Baker. That concludes episode 17 in this series. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we will examine January 1968 of the Hendrix story, including the Scandinavian, French and US gigs, recording for the Electric Ladyland LP, and much, much more. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any stories or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Finally, thank you so much for your wonderful comments and continuing support. Remember, there's much more of the story yet to be told.